Okay, so who doesn't like Star Wars? You better all like Star Wars because we're going to talk about Force and the Force be with you. Good old Yoda, he's my favorite. How can you not like Yoda? How can you not like Star Wars? Anyways, so that is what we're going to talk a little bit about in this lesson. Yes, force and motion. We're going to be talking a lot about physics in the next couple units, okay? So prepare yourself because physics has basically everything to do with everyday life. Okay, everything you do has to do with physics. It's kind of cool. So hopefully you guys enjoy this. So the first thing is let's talk about a force. A force is a push or a pull. And different forces, different types of forces affect all matter. I mean, look at these two guys. They're going at it. Look at that force. And it's like, and all that slobber and sweat and everything is like, just falling off him. Gross, right? And then this force, yeah, that's pretty crazy, this collision. And then this force. So you have to know that a force isn't just kind of forcing into something or someone. That's what we think of. It also is a pull. It's a pull on something. Okay, so I want you guys to think around, like look around while you're listening to this and think about maybe you're sitting on a couch, I'm sitting on a chair. I'm actually exerting a force on the chair, and the chair is exerting a force on me. And that force is equal because you have to understand if the forces were unequal, I'd be on the floor because the chair would have broke. So there's an equal amount of force, me on the chair and the chair exerting on me, that I'm able to stand or sit here and not fall and be hurt or something like that. So please know that forces are every day. I mean, when you touch the table, you're exerting a force, okay? And it's exerting a force against you. When you pull on something, that's a force as well. And it's affecting all matter, okay? You may not be able to see it, but everything is made up of molecules. So the table that my computer sits on is made up of all these molecules, and because it's a solid, these molecules are really tight together, and they're kind of just going like this against each other, just kind of vibrating. But when I push down on that table, I ever so slightly move those molecules. Not like I'm putting an indentation in my wood, but at the same time it's made of molecules, so you're still affecting that matter. Kind of something cool to think about, right? So all forces are measured in newtons, named after Sir Isaac Newton, pretty important physicist from way back in the past, okay? He came up with some pretty important laws that we're going to talk about shortly, but it is measured in newtons. All forces are measured in newtons, okay? You could actually calculate your weight in newtons, but we don't do that. We use pounds, or in other countries they use kilograms. So anyways, just so you guys know, anytime that you guys are going to work on any equations where you're calculating a force, because when we actually talk about Newton's second law, you will be using an equation, you have to put it in newtons, okay? You always have to use your units. You always have to put your units after there. So it's a big N, capital N for newtons, okay? All right, so I've got some examples. Forces, here's some kind of humorous ones, some funny ones. Again, maybe not the most comfortable, maybe, should I say, of forces, but let's watch this. There you go, 35 forces in 30 seconds. So obviously that one was of, people being hit by a ball, which is definitely a force, and that matter, being the person, was definitely affected, maybe a black eye or so. But there's some examples of forces. Now let's talk laws. We're going to talk about a little bit about good old Sir Isaac Newton. So not Olivia Newton-John, if any of you guys even know who she is, because you guys are so young. She was like this crazy exercise queen back in the day. But no, not this Newton, this Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. Okay, so he is a guy that you're going to get to know very well over the next who knows how many years when you're, in school until high school. And you might even hear about him in college a little bit. Okay, but Sir Isaac Newton, he came up with 3 laws of motion. Okay, and these laws of motion were basically helping to describe the interaction of forces between different, things that result in movement. Okay, so here it says three laws of motion in order to describe the interaction of forces on a body that results in movement. Okay, so why things move and interact the way they do are based on these three laws. Okay, so I've got a great video to show you guys. If you guys like Legos, I love Legos. Maybe I'll bring back some memories, but actually I'd still play with Legos even if I could, but if I had time. Anyways, watch this because it gives you guys a great example of the three laws that we're going to talk a little bit more about.
Day by day, week by week, you go about your everyday lives and never once stop to think about the science behind it all. Whether it's as simple a task as picking up a pencil or kicking a football, you are demonstrating some of the most famous scientific theories of our time. Without one man's crucial scientific discovery, we would have very little knowledge in the fields of gravity and force as we do today. And that man was Sir Isaac Newton. Newton was walking in his garden one day when he noticed an apple fall off a nearby tree. And then suddenly, an idea struck him. Several ideas. Newton spent many years exploring physics and creating new laws, which we will be experimenting with today. This is Andy, and this is Ben. They will be our test subjects for today. Newton's first law of physics states that any object in motion will stay in motion unless acted upon by an outside force. Here, we will be demonstrating that by throwing a ball. Freeze it. Okay, as we can see here, the ball is in motion due to the force from Andy's throw. If the world had no air and no gravity, the ball would just glide like that forever. Unfortunately, that isn't the case. On Earth, we have two outside forces acting on the moving object: air resistance and gravity. If Ben weren't in the way, the ball would have eventually fallen to the ground. Newton's second law said that the net force is equal to the overall mass of an object multiplied by its acceleration, that the acceleration of the object is equal to the net force acting on it divided by the object's mass. Here, we shall demonstrate this with a simple kick of a ball. Freeze frame. Okay, so here, let's say the force from Ben's kick is equal to 400 newtons, while the object's mass is, say, 200 grams. If we apply Newton's second law of physics, we can conclude that the acceleration of the ball is 2 meters per second squared. And finally, we come to Newton's third law. This law states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. By that, whenever an object exerts a force on another object, the second object exerts an equal and opposite force back on the original object. This law can be demonstrated by a simple game of pool table. Freeze it. Now, as you can see, when the cue ball hit the black ball, not only did it cause the black ball to move, but it also caused the cue ball to stop in its place, hence equal and opposite reaction. And thus, those are Sir Isaac Newton's three laws of physics. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. And remember, gravity isn't just a good idea. It's the law.
Okay, so I wanted you guys to see that because I thought it was a great kind of visuals for what's going on in Sir Isaac Newton's 3 laws of motion. So let's talk about them real quickly because you guys got to see some examples and we'll talk more about it in the live class. But Newton's first law is the law of inertia, okay, which states a body continues in its state of rest or in continuous motion unless a force acts upon it. So basically, I'm sitting here, and unless something acts upon me, or if I decide to get up, because that's still a force, then I'm going to stay at rest. If something is in motion, it's going to stay at motion unless something acts upon it. Now remember, like in that video, there is the force of gravity and air resistance that do stop things. Okay, so those are forces that are acting upon it. But if we didn't have those, things would continue in motion. We call that perpetual motion. So inertia is the resistance to motion that an object possesses. So I want you guys just to think about this, and we'll talk more about this in the live class, but the inertia of an object is directly related to the mass of an object. It's not necessarily the mass, but you have to understand it's the resistance to motion that an object possesses based on kind of the mass of that object, okay? So it says this little car has less inertia than a big truck. Well, yeah, right? So it might be a little bit easier to push this car than a big truck because of its inertia, okay? We'll talk a little bit more about that. Newton's second law is the law of acceleration. Now, there's not a lot to talk about with this other than this is a very important equation that you're going to need to know. If the force applied to an object causes an acceleration of the object that's proportional to the force and inversely proportional to the mass of the object, thus giving you force equals mass times acceleration. So if you know the mass of an object and maybe you know the acceleration of an object, you can find the force. You can also change this equation around to solve for m or a. So we'll talk about that again and actually have some practice with that. But you guys have to know this equation because that's Newton's second law of acceleration, where you can figure out those different things. You can figure out force if you have these two. You can figure out acceleration if you have mass and force, and so forth. Okay? All right, so that's also called the cause and effect relationship. Dun, dun, dun. And the third and final, Newton's third law, the law of action and reaction. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So obviously, if you're getting punched, it's like boom, force, reaction. Okay, equal and opposite. These lovely things are, a great example of that as well. You let the ball hit, and there's a reaction, and it gives an equal, there's a action, and then there's an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, so forces do not work alone, but they always work in pairs. All right, so let's talk quickly about friction, the opposing force of motion. So without friction, we wouldn't be able to walk. We would literally fall down flat on our backs. Okay, we would not be able to walk. We wouldn't be able to, do anything. Kind of think of an ice skating rink where if you're playing hockey, that hockey puck goes along that ice. Friction is minimalized. It's not, if we had no friction, that puck would go on forever. But it's minimalized when you have ice. Also, your lovely fingerprints, those are for actual friction. I know that you probably never knew. I mean, obviously it's identification purposes, but in order to pick up a piece of paper, you need those lovely fingerprints. It causes friction. Okay, and the last thing we're going to talk about is gravity, the force of the earth pulling on an object. So the magnitude of the pull of gravity on your body can be measured by your body weight. So we're going to talk a lot more about gravity, especially in the next unit, because we're going to talk all about that. So I'm not going to spend too much time. But it is the force of the earth pulling on an object. Okay, there's different gravities all over. Gravity on the moon is different than gravity on earth, but it is still the force, okay, that pulls on an object. Okay? Now I'm going to save our example because I have another funny video, but I'm going to save that for our live class when we talk about gravity in depth. Okay? So that is it for today and for our lesson, for Howie's mini lesson, but we will talk more about this in our live class. Okay? See you then.